Welcome by this presentation by Zeno Analytics. We help you close the gap between reality and expectations of your advanced analytics investments and projects. This presentation uses simple classification as an example to illustrate why business involvement in any analytics project is of extreme importance. Simple classification is used to predict binary outcomes. So yes, no outcomes. Does somebody respond? Is a lead converted? Did somebody cancel their contract? Will somebody pay their bill? Is a transaction fraudulent? Is there a cybersecurity breach? And analytical techniques commonly used for these types of questions are machine learning techniques, including decision trees and predictive models. The first question that the business needs to ask is, what are we actually classifying? Are we classifying response or conversion? So people that respond to a campaign or people that respond and buy. Only response models are interesting for people selling campaign ads, for example, like Google or Facebook or LinkedIn. Conversion is where the money comes in, but conversion after the campaign also has a cost. And what about, do we actually take future expected value or expected value of the campaign into account when we do the classification? Because else we might actually have, and I've had several customers over the years that were very good at creating campaigns for one-hit bargain hunters and that wouldn't buy additional products from them. In payment and credit scoring, when we predict, are they likely to pay? Are we just looking at payment overall, or do we look at payment within a certain period of time? And how much collection effort is involved to actually get the payment in? Cancellations, are we taking those overall, or are we only looking at people that voluntarily cancel their contracts? And maybe we want to look at, do we actually want to keep them? Are they profitable customers, or are they customers that are going to buy more in the future? Is it actually possible to save them? And what is a cancellation? Is a cancellation a real event that we can determine, or do we need to determine a cutoff point? For example, on a website, when is a website visitor not longer returning? When did he cancel his loyalty to my site? And fraudulent transactions or fraudsters, do we really want to stop a transaction, or do we want to catch a criminal? And do we take value into account? So do we look at fraud only over a certain amount, or do we want to look fraud all over, to all types of fraud? There are some choices to be made. For example, where is the cutoff point between the classification into the yes/no? It really depends on your risk appetite or your aggressiveness that you want to show in the market, or your budget that you have available, the targets that are set, or the resources that you have available, and many more factors could be of influence. For example, where do I put my credit risk? If normally I have 1% of my customers not paying their bills, and I have a model that says, okay, this segment 10% has a risk of cancellation. That's a tenfold increase compared to my base rate. Is that enough for me, or do I want to actually only look at the ones that have 25 times the risk compared to my normal base rate? Or how aggressive do I actually want to go into the market? Am I only interested in respondents that have a 10 times more higher probability of responding to my campaign, or is a factor 2 enough? And that's the other question. Should we actually use classification, or should we use the scores as an index or ranking? Is a yes/no classification clear cut? Is it clearly a matter of determining yes/no, or is it a different treatment, that if I have a credit risk of 10% in a segment, I will treat them differently than if they have a credit risk of 50%, and I will treat them differently, especially if they have a credit risk of less than 1%. So is the yes/no classification clear cut? And when is a model good enough? What are our expectations of the model? Do we expect a perfect model, or are we realistic, and do we say, well, maybe we should be satisfied with a model that maybe helps me increase my response rate by 2%, and then maybe I can increase that performance of the model going forward. And how and when and where do we deploy the results? How does it fit in the business process? For example, a retention model predicting a cancellation of a contract. How long do I need to actually set up my campaign, run my campaign, do the follow-ups for a possible cancellation date? So if that takes me about 3 months, I need to actually make a prediction of the cancellation 3 months before the end of the contract. And I need to look at what data do I have available the moment I want to actually use the results in my organization. I can maybe build a perfect model on data that is not available easily at the moment I want to use it. So maybe I need to be satisfied with a model that may be less performing, but more easily to deploy, and look at increased deployment options at a later stage. And how do I actually monitor the performance of my model? How do I actually measure if the model is still performing, or if I need to end the life cycle and change it? And when doesn't it perform anymore? When do I actually decide that the model should be refreshed or renewed? How to decide? Some examples. In simple classification, usually classification or confusion matrix or other names have been described is used, where you have on the top end the actual result of the data that you use to build the model, and on the left hand side you have the prediction that comes out. So you have true positives, where the actual result is yes and the prediction is yes. You have true negatives, where the actual result is no and the prediction is no. You have false negatives, where the actual result is yes, but the prediction is no. And you have false positives, where the prediction is yes, but the actual is no. So those are the 4 outcomes when you use simple classification. And what you hear a lot these days, and it's overhyped, is the term accuracy, how accurate a model is. And the accuracy is basically calculated by taking all the true positives and true negatives. So all the ones where the actual is yes and the prediction is yes, and all the actuals are no and the prediction is no, and divide that by all cases. Now that is only useful in very specific applications, and we'll see one of them further down the line in credit scoring. But one of the examples with that is, for example, if you have a low number of occurrences. If I have 100,000 mailings that I've sent out and I only got 1,000 response, then I can predict with an accuracy of 99% by saying nobody is going to respond. So accuracy is useful in some cases, but overall it is not the best way to look at a model. As an example, prospecting with lookalikes. So basically finding others, companies or consumers that are similar to your current customer base. The only important cells from an evaluation perspective in this case are the true positive and the false negative, because we only have information about the companies that are actually a customer. We do not have any information about companies that will not be your customer, whatever you offer them. So what we're trying to do is actually maximize the true positives. In this case, we minimize the false negatives. And if there are still false negatives, they need additional work or maybe additional data to better work it. And your target category in this case is the false positives, because they're most similar to your current customers. The true negatives are undecided, and maybe a pilot marketing campaign or some other tests in that area should help you identify possible other customers that do not look like your current customers but might be good customers. You need to be very careful, so a big caution on this, that you're not recreating your previous targeting tactics, because your customer base is built up out of the selections and the decisions you made in the past to actually make offers to companies. And the other thing that you need to be aware of is that this model does not give you any probabilities. So the outcome is not a probability that somebody is going to be a customer. It is a score that indicates how much a company looks like your current customer base. A next example is campaign response or conversion. So basically finding others that are likely to buy of a campaign or to respond to a campaign. The true positives and the true negatives are the focus to look at your evaluation, because those are the ones that you classify correctly in with your prediction model. The false positives and the false negatives could be due to all kinds of other factors, so you shouldn't throw them out completely. One of the false positive reasons might be that they've just had a quarrel at home and therefore they weren't in the mood to respond, or the sun might be shining or not, or your timing may be off. The false negatives could be a matter of not having enough data, or maybe using another approach, or maybe using another type of classification model. So it's not a matter of throwing them out. So the evaluation is on the true positives and the true negatives, but the false positives and the false negatives may need additional work. You need to have a big caution here that the model is only valid for the current campaign characteristics. So on your selection, you may have pre-selected, your timing is of importance, the message may be important, the channel. So the false positives might also be open for other types of offers or other types of campaigns, as would be the true negatives. So it's not you're not throwing them out, you're just refocusing this campaign, but you might want to look at other types of campaigns for the other ones. Credit scoring, or basically a model to help you determine if a customer is likely to default on their invoice, is one of the models where accuracy is very important. You want to be as accurate as possible in determining if a customer that is predicted to default actually defaults or not. Why? If you have too many false negatives, it increases your credit risks because you're accepting customers that are not paying their bills. Too many false positives decreases your opportunity for business because you're denying too many people business that could actually bring you revenue. So in this case, you're really focused around the true positive and the true negative, and you want to minimize the false positive and the false negatives. There is a caution for credit scoring. This is not the same as a failure score, or delinquency score, or another risk score that you might acquire from an external bureau. Those might be useful inputs, but they are usually not focused on your experience and your market that you're working in. So using this in combination with your own data might actually give you much better insights and decrease your credit risk and improve your opportunities in the market. Fraud detection is really about identifying potentially fraudulent transactions or fraudsters. Your focus again is the true positives and the true negatives, and you want to minimize the false negatives, because the false negatives are cases that you cannot yet identify. So they need additional work, maybe additional data or additional investigations. The false positives are possible fraud cases that you've missed. So even when you build a fraud model and you have false positives, you might want to do additional investigations to go after it. One big caution with fraud detection is with classification, you only target what I call the dumb frauds, the ones that have been caught already, that you're aware of. So you'll also need other approaches to identify other or new fraud schemes to make sure that you're staying up to date. Overall, you need to remember that all models are wrong, as Mr. Box and Mr. Draper said. It is really a matter of how useful are they. Are they actually bringing me value? But I know that they're wrong, so I need to keep monitoring them and I need to keep looking at them. So we need to be agile. We need to continuously learn and adapt using this framework from John Boyd based on fighter pilot decision making. We need to observe what is happening. We need to orient what is happening. Then we need to make a decision. We take an action, and we need to incorporate continuous feedback loops. And we need to look at changing circumstances. We need to look at the results of our actions. We need to look at new data that is coming in all the time. This was the presentation by Zeno Analytics. If you want to have an analytics process review of some of your current analytics processes, if you are interested in an executive workshop on analytics strategy, or if you want a full-blown analytics acumen assessment or a redesign of your analytics solutions, please contact me on the below information.